Got one more thing to talk about surface water, or just to mention when talking about surface water, and that is the geology of the land really does affect how much water is there. We know that that around the equator, there's more rainfall, but we also know that a lot of it moves very quickly through the ground. We know that just above the equator there is a very arid region, and so you can see on this map that when you go north of the equator, there's a lot of areas that are going to experience surface water issues just because of their natural ecology. A lot of that has to do with mountain arrangements and the land and how much water will move over the land as opposed to like sitting and infiltrating down. So if there's higher gradients of elevation change, and or if it's just a really landlocked region, there's a lot of different reasons why that band of arid land has those features, but it is a matter of contemplation when dealing or talking about surface water and knowing that a lot of these areas are highly populated. This has been an area of human settlement of like ancient history, right? And we're looking at increases of water shortages in these areas because as population grows, we're just using that surface water. It seems endless, but it's really not. It's a finite resource. So that's another, just kind of to close it up and think about that. So as we move into the next topic, which is we're going to be talking about groundwater. So we talked about surface water. Groundwater is a resource as well. Groundwater is used to supply cities. It grows food, and it is used a lot in agriculture. It's pumped out of something called an aquifer, but oftentimes we are using our groundwater faster than it can be replenished. It has a process of replenishment in an aquifer. Is that precipitation has to infiltrate through the ground, and there's a lot of different ways that can happen. There's a lot of different types of aquifers, so you've got an assignment to take notes on aquifers and how they work. So you will, from that, you have a little more understanding of what groundwater really is like. So we know that they are a renewable resource unless they become contaminated, and the overpumping can be a reason why they become contaminated, as one water table may pull on another water table, and if a water table has salt in it, it may pull salts, or it may pull some fossil fuels into areas that should be fresh, and we know that then that becomes a problem. We've even seen this as part of the fossil fuel industry, kind of like an issue with getting some of the fossil fuels out of the ground. There are groundwater is a thing, but there's also places that have a lot of fossil fuels captured in the ground as well, and we don't necessarily want those to mix. Makes sense, right? We have widespread drilling of wells by farmers. This accelerates aquifer pumping. If limits are not placed on the amount of irrigation, and then we know that farmers are never going to want any one factor to be a limiter to their production. So according to that law, they want water to be a limiter. So they're definitely going to typically oversaturate, use more than is what scientifically exactly needed. In 2008, Saudi Arabia announced that it had actually depleted its major deep aquifer. And so that was a pretty significant moment historically, where you've got multiple cities, a whole society relying on water being in the ground, and then it is not available. So groundwater, obviously, there are advantages and disadvantages to using groundwater, so what we call withdrawal, right? Groundwater exists almost everywhere. It is renewable if it is not contaminated. It's cheaper to extract than most surface waters. However, there are a lot of problems that come up with this. So subsidence is a sinking of the land from overpumping. This is what there will be a picture a little bit later, but this is a reality in California. Aquifer depletion happens kind of silently. It takes geological experts to make estimations or to make measures about how much water is actually in the ground. So it's kind of like a mystery in a lot of ways to people. It seems like an unending resource. So the Ogallala Aquifer is the largest known aquifer. It irrigates the Great Plains. It's a very, very slow slow recharge aquifer. It's in a big flat area, but the water table is dropping. Water was pumped 10 to 40 times faster than the recharge rate over the last like during the 1900s. Government farm subsidies resulted in even further depletion, meaning that governments were paying farmers to farm this land and giving them money to buy irrigation equipment, to buy pumps, to really develop the land agriculturally. And so the Ogallala aquifer has been overused. Because this changes the ecology of the land, then there is habitat loss. There are less small lakes and ponds. The water table drops completely. Then it changes the water that's available for the plants. And then if plants change, then the biota will change as well. The animals and the insects and things, birds that are supported there. So this is a map of the Ogallala region. So you can see that throughout the Midwest, we've got like a lot of farming, and here is really where water level changes are happening. So North Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, the east side of Colorado, all the way up into Nebraska, there are problems with overpumping. Overpumping can limit food production and end up raising prices in the long run. It widens the gap between the rich and the poor. I talked about land subsidence. The San Joaquin Valley in our state is one of these, and in Mexico City, this is an issue as well, where the ground is actually sinking because we take water out of the ground. Groundwater overdrafts near the coastal region can contaminate water with salt water, or can contaminate the groundwater with salt water, because it will actually pull on the water table that has salt in it and infiltrate that. So here's a picture of the San Joaquin Valley, and you can see in 1925, there is a label at the top. So let me see if I can kind of like point over here at the very top, 1925, then 1955. And then this picture is taken in 1977, but it's actually continued to drop. And this is from pulling groundwater for agricultural use in the Central Valley. So groundwater depletion prevention is a more effective issue. There's a real fight over water, though, in California, because farmers want to be able to make money and they want to use the land. Well, we live in an arid region. It's not necessarily the best place to be growing food, and not high water need foods. So rice and corn and things, it's not necessarily the best place for that. You can kind of dig into that one on your own. But take a look at the comparison between prevention and control. Some of the controls, taxes, using incentives and taxation, but then also trying to use some different materials in terms of like how we actually build our cities. How can we increase freshwater supply? For us, basically, large dam and reservoir systems, and California definitely has those in place. We're actually decommissioning some dams. Greatly expanded water supplies in some areas have been attributed to those dams and reservoir systems. We know that there's a downside to that, and that it disrupts ecosystems. People are displaced, and we know that we didn't really consider traditional indigenous peoples and how they were using land when, as a government, as a United States government, we came in and paid a lot of money to just put a bunch of dams in for power generation and water conservation. So those are good things, but you have a trade-off. Large dams can be a benefit. We've talked about this a little bit. Flood control, generating electricity, supplying irrigation and recreation. Reservoirs increase reliable runoff, and we can kind of keep it steady, but they do displace people. They impair ecological services of the river. They endanger plant and animal species, and dams fill up with sediment. Sediments don't go through, and they'll actually fill up within 50 years. Oroville Dam in California was compromised a few years back when there was a really extremely heavy rainfall after we had a lot of time of drought, and then there was a spillway damage. I don't know if you guys saw that, but the spillway damage was a really scary thing for a lot of people that live downstream, because there was a whole group of people that were actually evacuated out. 180,000 people were evacuated out with only an hour's notice, because they were afraid that the dam was going to fail and flood the area. So this is a picture of the spillway, like, I don't know, what you call that, event, where the water just was out of control, rushing in. So erosion began to happen very quickly there. So you can see the before on the left, and on the right during the spillway, during that failure, the snowmelt was just unending. So this is a diagram just kind of talking about how dams function, and like gives you a actual like physical diagram of all of the risks and the rewards to putting in reservoirs. So take a look at it. One thing I want you to be really cognizant of is the fact that reservoirs hold water. They use a downward flow of water to turn a turbine for electrical generation. And then there is a series of pumps that will actually take the water that they've released and they'll pump it back into the reservoir for electricity generation. So they'll use the pumps, they'll create electricity, use those pumps, pump water back in during the night when electricity use is low, just to keep that if there's not like a constant steady supply from the snow. So that dams are a pretty cool technological advance, but there are definitely some downsides. Climate change intensifies when we have, when we have climate change, it intensifies our weather extremes. Mountain snowpack is typically reduced, making less fresh water available downstream. So when water levels drop, the hydroelectric dams can't really function. The Colorado River will likely not be able to meet water demands in Arizona, New Mexico, and California because those populations are growing, and we have found that has to be very, very closely regulated. Dams can really damage estuaries. An estuary is the area where the river reaches the shore, and only now only like a little bit of water from the Colorado River actually reaches the Gulf of California, and so that estuary has been very extremely damaged by the loss of water flowing into that area. The current rate of river withdrawal just really isn't sustainable. Part of it does come from the inefficient use of irrigation water for agriculture, and so that's something that needs to be closely looked at, and there need to be changes in order to create sustainability. Proposed actions for the states that use the Colorado River are to put strict conservation measures in place to phase out agricultural subsidies so that the government isn't actually paying farmers to damage the ecosystem. Shift away from water-thirsty crops to ones that are more adapted for arid regions, and place a price on the fresh water, because right now there's a lot of just open rights for agriculture. The Morelos Dam near Yuma, Arizona, opened for 2 months to release water through the delta for just to kind of get out of the way in 2014, to get out of the way of the flow to the Gulf of Mexico. And there was a lot of change that happened in the estuary during that time. I actually have a video that I've shown in the past. Maybe I'll try to dig that out and show you guys just when they started to release the water, how things changed for the estuary. So one thing you need to know is that the National Environmental Policy Act requires that an impact statement be developed for a federal project that would likely have some large or any environmental quality impact. We look at impact on soil, water, air quality, and wildlife. And so anytime new development is looked at, this is part of the current standard. And but the Environmental Policy Act wasn't instituted until what I think I'm not going to quote it, but it was not around when we were first developing dams and looking at ways that we could use rivers in California or New Mexico in the western states. All right, looks like I'm done with my time on this spot. So let me go ahead and stop here, and then I guess we'll have another installment.